The morning her children threw her away, Eleanor Whitcomb was wearing her good coat, the wool one, the one she saved for church and funerals. She hadn't known when she put it on which kind of day it would turn out to be. She was 70 years old, and she stood on the sidewalk in front of the only home she'd known for 40 years, watching the door close behind her. 2 cardboard boxes at her feet, 1 old suitcase with a broken handle held together with garden twine, and in her purse, folded small $56.38. That was everything. That was the sum of Eleanor Whitcomb at 70. Let me tell you how a thing like this happens, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens slow. The way frost takes a window. You don't see it moving. You just wake up one morning and you can't see through the glass anymore. Her name was Eleanor. Walter had called her Nell. For 41 years he'd called her Nell in the kitchen in the dark across the long quiet of an ordinary good marriage. Then 3 years ago the cancer took him, and there was no one left in the world who called her anything but mother, and lately not even that very often. She and Walter had built a life in that house in Cedar Hollow, Vermont. 3 bedrooms, a garden out back where Walter planted roses the last summer he had legs strong enough to dig. They'd raised 2 children under that roof, Daniel, who was 45 now, and Sandra, 42, raised them, fed them, sat up with them through fevers, watched them grow into people with careers and houses and lives that had less and less room in them, the way grown children's lives do. The house was paid off. Walter had seen to that. It was the one thing Nell owned free and clear in all the world. And then she signed it away. She wants you to understand she wasn't a fool. She was tired. There's a difference, though. The world rarely allows it. The roof needed work she couldn't pay for. The furnace groaned through the Vermont winters. The property taxes climbed every single year while her Social Security sat still at $1,200 a month. And Daniel had a way of explaining things. "Mom," he'd said at a family dinner with that patient voice, "if something happens to you, this makes it simple. No probate, no lawyers taking their cut. Just put our names on the deed alongside yours. We're family. We'd never let anything happen to you. We're family." She signed the papers in the spring. By November, she understood what she'd signed, because on a cold, gray Tuesday, Daniel and Sandra came to the house, together, unannounced, and they brought a third person with them, a man in a sharp coat with a leather folio under his arm, a real estate agent. They sat her down in her own living room, the room where she'd rocked them both as babies, and they explained the decision they had already made. "The house is too much for you, Mom," Sandra said, not quite looking at her. "You're 70. You can't keep up with it. It isn't safe." "We found a place," Daniel said, and slid a glossy brochure across the coffee table. "Assisted living, very nice, meals included, people your own age." Nell looked at the brochure. "A single room, a shared bathroom down the hall. $3,000 a month, more than twice what she had to live on." "And how," she asked, "would I pay for that?" That's when Daniel told her about the buyer. $485,000, he said, like it was a gift he was handing her. They'd use the money from the house to cover the facility. She'd be taken care of. The words went into her slow, like cold water finding its way through wool. "You're selling my home." "It's our house now, Mom." Sandra's voice had gone flat, harder than Nell had ever heard it. "You signed it over, remember? Best for everyone," Daniel said. "That's all this is. Best for everyone." Nell heard her own voice come out steady, which surprised her. "Or best for you." And Daniel's face changed then. The patience fell off it, like a mask off a hook, and underneath was something she'd never let herself see in her own son before. "You're becoming a burden, Mom." He said it quietly, which made it worse. "The calls about the furnace, the worry, we have our own families. We can't keep carrying you." Burden. There's a word that does something to a person. It went into Nell, and it found 40 years of 3 a.m. feedings and packed lunches and saved up grocery money, and it set all of it on fire. She had given these two people every single thing she had, and she had become, in the ledger of their lives, a line in the debit column. "I have never," she said, and her voice shook now just once, "asked either of you for one thing." "Well," Sandra snapped, "you're asking now. Just by existing. And we're done." The house would sell in 2 weeks. The buyer wanted it empty. Nell was to pack what she could carry and be ready for the facility by the 15th. "And if I say no?" she asked, though she already knew. "The house is legally ours," Daniel said. "Don't make us do this the hard way." Then they left, with the agent, to talk about staging. They did not help her pack. They did not ask if she had money. They did not stay for the tea she'd put on before they came. Back when she still thought it was just a visit, she packed alone. She went upstairs to the room she'd shared with Walter for 41 years, and she folded what would fit into 2 boxes and a broken suitcase, clothes, a handful of photographs, Walter's watch, the one that still kept time, her mother's Bible, the spine gone soft as cloth, and the coins she'd been quietly tucking into the hem of an old dress, a few at a time, money saved back from a grocery budget that had no room to save anything. Some animal part of her, it seemed, had known, long before her mind would say it out loud, that a day might come when she'd need to run. Everything else stayed: the wedding dishes, the quilts she'd sewn by hand, the books, 40 years of a life left behind for her children to throw in a dumpster. On the morning of the 15th, a moving truck came, not for her, for the new owners. The men inside had been told to help the old woman get her things to the curb. So they did, without a word, and then they drove off to empty the house of everything that had ever mattered. And that is how Eleanor Whitcomb came to be standing on a sidewalk at 10:30 on a cold November morning, 70 years old, 2 boxes, 1 broken suitcase, $56.38, invisible. That was the word for it. Cars went by and did not slow. A neighbor she'd known 20 years found something very interesting to look at in the other direction. The world had simply stopped seeing her, as if being old and being discarded had together made her transparent, a pane of glass nobody bothers to look through. She sat down on the suitcase, pulled the good wool coat tighter, and tried to think what a person does next when there is no next. And that's when she saw the newspaper. Somebody had stuffed that morning's Cedar Hollow Free Press into the trash can by the curb. The wind had worked one section loose. The classified page and a headline on it caught her eye and held it. County to auction condemned properties. Minimum bid $1. Nell pulled the paper out of the trash, her hands shaking a little from cold or from something else. She read it twice. The county was selling off properties, abandoned ones, condemned ones, trying to claw back unpaid taxes. The auction was that afternoon, 2 o'clock, at the county building downtown. She looked at the boxes that held her whole life. She looked at the house behind her, the one her children had sold out from under her like a used car. She looked at the $56, and something happened inside Eleanor Whitcomb that hadn't happened in a very long time. A thought arrived, hard and clear and entirely her own. If she was going to be homeless, then by God, she would be homeless somewhere that belonged to her, somewhere no living soul could ever take from her again. Condemned, worthless, falling down. It didn't matter. If it had her name on the deed, then it was hers, and hers was a thing she had not been able to say about one single object in the world since the morning she'd signed those papers. She folded the newspaper, put it in her purse next to the coins, and she stood up off that suitcase like a woman with somewhere to be. The county building smelled of old paper and floor wax, and the particular boredom of government. The auction was in a basement room with folding chairs and humming fluorescent lights. By the time Nell got there, dragging her suitcase, the boxes balanced on top, maybe 30 people had gathered. Men mostly, business casual men with phones and notebooks and the easy, loud confidence of people who do this for a living. Real estate investors, here to buy cheap and sell dear. They talked over each other, compared notes, laughed about the junk the county was trying to move. Nell found a chair in the back corner, sat, folded her hands, and a few of the men glanced at her the way you glance at a thing that's wandered into the wrong room. An old woman with a broken suitcase. Not competition, not anything. The auctioneer was a heavy-set man named Gus Pelham, who'd clearly done this 100 times and wanted to be home. He read the rules fast. Sold as is, no warranties, pay immediately, cash or cashier's check, minimum bid $1. Then he started, and the properties moved quick. A downtown lot, a fire-damaged duplex, a house with water in the basement. The investors bid hard, driving the numbers up, all of them, knowing exactly which ruins had gold in them. 12,000, 38,000, 45. Nell watched and learned and held her purse in her lap with both hands, because every property that climbed past $56 was a door closing, and there had been a great many doors. By the time Pelham was 2 hours in and down to the bottom of his stack, Nell's hope had worn down to almost nothing. All right, Pelham rubbed his eyes, second to last. And folks, this one's a real prize. The room chuckled. They knew his sarcasm by now. Property 22, end of Timber Ridge Road, 12 miles out, give or take. Single-family dwelling, about 1,200 square feet, built around 1870. A pause. Abandoned 15 years. No power, no water, no working septic. Roofs caved on one side. Foundations shifting. Mold throughout. County inspector condemned it. Recommended demolition. Somebody in the front row laughed out loud. Access is a dirt forestry road. Impassable in winter. No neighbors for miles. Sits on 2 1/3 acres of trees. Pelham allowed himself a small, tired grin. And as a bonus, there's a family of raccoons living in the kitchen rent-free. The room came apart laughing. So, Pelham spread his hands. Who will start me at $1 for this dream home? Silence. Not one hand went up. Nobody wanted a condemned shack in the woods with no roof and raccoons for tenants. Pelham waited, cajoled. Come on, it's a steal at twice the price. More laughter. No bids. He shrugged, ready to move on. And Eleanor Whitcomb heard her own voice come out of the back of the room. $5. Every head turned. Pelham squinted past the lights. I'm sorry. Did somebody say 5? Nell stood, so he could see her, her knees not quite steady, but her chin up. She held the bill in the air, and it trembled, but she held it. $5, she said again, louder, for the property. For about 3 seconds, the room was perfectly silent. Then it started, and this time it wasn't polite. It was loud. It was men actually pointing, a few of them turning to each other with delighted faces, like they'd just seen the funniest thing all year. Lady, you know what you're bidding on. That place is a death trap, sweetheart. She's buying a raccoon condo. Pelham raised a hand for quiet, and when he looked at her, his face had lost the grin. Ma'am, I need you to understand. This property is condemned. It's not safe. No power, no water 12 miles out on a road nobody plows. You sure you want to do this? I'm sure, Nell said. Anybody want to bid against the lady? Pelham called, half hoping she thought that somebody would, to save her from herself. $6, anyone? Laughter. But no hands, because why would a man pay $6 for a thing that would cost $60,000 to make livable going once? Pelham said slowly. At 5, a pause. Going twice, another pause, a long one, giving the whole room a chance to stop the madness. Nobody did. Sold, property 22, to the lady in the back for $5. The room burst into applause, the mocking kind, and Nell didn't hear it. She walked to the front on legs that had carried her 70 years, and she counted out 5 soft dollar bills onto the table one at a time, and she signed her name where Pelham showed her. A younger investor caught her near the door. Expensive watch. Not unkind exactly. "Look," he said, "I don't know your situation, but that place is genuinely dangerous. Floors rotted through, no heat. You'll get hurt out there. Or worse, renovation's 70 grand easy. You got that kind of money?" Nell looked at him, square. "I have everything I need," she said. It was a lie. It was said so steady that the man stepped back from it, and then she walked out of that basement with a deed in a manila envelope. Past 30 men who thought they'd watched a crazy old woman buy her own grave for the price of a sandwich. But Nell wasn't listening to them anymore. She was reading the map clipped to the deed. 1847, Timber Ridge Road, 12 miles, no car, no phone, no plan past surviving the night. And one thing she hadn't had 3 hours ago, a home, condemned, falling down, full of raccoons, but hers, with a deed that said in the county's own ink Eleanor Whitcomb owner. Nobody could take it, not Daniel, not Sandra, not anybody who'd ever live. It was a start. Getting there was its own ordeal. A taxi would have cost $40 she didn't have, so she walked. Not the whole 12 miles, no, but the 3 to the edge of town, where she found a little general store at a crossroads. The owner was locking up for the evening, an older man with kind, tired eyes named Hollis Barnes. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, and there was real concern in it, the first she'd heard in days. "I need to get to Timber Ridge Road," she said. "I bought a property out there. I've no way to it." Hollis took her in. The boxes, the broken suitcase, the good wool coat, and something in his face softened. "Timber Ridge. That's deep out. Nothing there but old logging cuts." "I know," Nell said. "That's where I'm going." He studied her a long moment, then made up his mind the way decent people do without making a show of it. "I'm headed that way home. Truck's around back. Can't pay me, I expect." "I can't." "Didn't ask," said Hollis. "Come on." The drive took half an hour, most of it on roads that got worse the farther they went. Hollis tried a little conversation, gentle, curious, and Nell kept her answers small because how do you tell a stranger that your own children put you on a curb? Finally, they turned onto what the map called a road and what was really just 2 tire ruts swallowed in forest. Branches scraped the truck, and then the ruts opened into a clearing, and there it was, Nell's house. Even in the failing November light, even washed in Hollis's headlights, the place looked like something out of a bad dream. Small, a logger's cottage or a hunter's cabin, thrown up sometime around 1870. The bones of it had been good once. Thick timber, a real stone foundation, but 150 years and 15 of pure abandonment had had their way with it. The roof sagged in the middle with a hole gaping on the right 3 feet across. Every window was a black, empty socket with teeth of broken glass. The front door hung off one hinge. Vines had grown up through the porch boards. The whole thing leaned just slightly to the left, like the forest had got a grip on it and was patiently pulling it down into the ground. Hollis let out a low whistle. "That's what you bought. That's what I bought." "Ma'am, that's not a house. That's kindling waiting on a wind." "It's mine," Nell said, and the 2 words came out of her with a weight that surprised them both. "It's all I have." Hollis was quiet a moment, then he sighed and reached behind the seat. "Let me at least help you get your things in. I got a tarp. We'll throw it over that hole. Won't be pretty, but it'll keep the worst of the weather off you tonight." They worked together in the dark for the better part of an hour. He pried the swollen door open with a crowbar. Inside was worse than out. One main room, maybe 300 square feet, with a wrecked kitchen on one side. Everything under a blanket of leaves and dirt and the black bloom of mold. The smell of it rot and damp and animal sat heavy in the throat. There were holes in the floor where boards had given way entirely, and up through the roof you could see the first stars coming out. And from the kitchen a sound, scratching, chittering, the raccoons, not impressed in the least by the change of ownership. Hollis got the tarp lashed over the roof hole, with rope tied to the old beams. He gave her a battery lantern, a bottle of water, and then quietly a $20 bill folded once. "I can't take that," Nell said. "You can and you will. Firm, but kind. Housewarming. Now listen, there's a camp store 5 miles back, basic supplies, and I come this way every few days. I'll look in on you." He hesitated at the door. "Ma'am, honest to God, the first hard freeze is any night now. This place has got no heat. People have died out here of less." "Thank you, Mr. Barnes," Nell said, and meant every letter of it. "I'll be fine." He didn't believe her. She could see he didn't, but he'd done what a good man could do for a stranger, and he climbed in his truck, and his taillights bounced away through the trees until the dark closed over them. And then Eleanor Whitcomb was alone, in a clearing, in a forest, in a house that should be torn down, the wind moving through the pines with a sound like a far-off ocean. The whole weight of the day came down on her shoulders at once. 70 years old, $51 and change, a ruin for a roof and raccoons for company. And here is the thing she'd turn over in her mind for the rest of her life. A reasonable woman would have wept, would have admitted it was hopeless, would have walked back toward town and thrown herself on the mercy of anyone who'd have her. But Nell wasn't feeling reasonable. She was feeling something else, something sharp and hot she hadn't let herself feel in years. Angry, not at Daniel, though God knew she had the right, not at Sandra, not even at the laughing men in the basement, at herself, for going soft, for letting herself be made small and dependent and easy to throw away, for signing those papers, for trusting a patient voice, for all the years she'd handed her own worth to other people and let them decide what it came to. And under the anger, harder and steadier, was the other thing, the thing that would save her life that winter and several times after. She was going to prove every last one of them wrong. She clicked on Hollis's lantern, and she walked into her house. The light showed her the full disaster, the debris, the mold, the holes, an ancient wood stove in the corner, so rusted it looked like it might collapse if she breathed on it, a crude wooden table against one wall, still standing somehow under the grime, and on top of a cabinet 4 pairs of eyes shining back at her, a mother raccoon, 3 kits, the mother chittering low and aggressive, defending her corner. "This is my house now," Nell said aloud, and was startled by how steady it came out. "But you can have tonight. Tomorrow you find your own place, same as me." The raccoon chattered right back, not the least bit cowed, and Nell, for the first time in longer than she could remember, almost laughed. At least someone in this house had some fight in her. She spent the next hour clearing a patch of floor. No broom, so she used a pine branch. No dustpan, so she used her hands, and her good nails broke one by one, and she didn't stop. She cleared a square maybe 6 feet on a side, laid her wool coat down for a ground cloth, took a blanket from a box, and set beside her careful the 2 things in all the world she'd carried out of 40 years, Walter's watch and her mother's Bible. She ate half a granola bar saved from breakfast, the only thing she'd eaten all day, drank some of Hollis's water, and laid down on her coat on the floor of a condemned house with the lantern close so she'd see anything that came near. She was cold. The thin blanket was no match for the November air pouring through the broken windows. Her back ached, her hands stung, but as she lay there 12 miles from another living soul, $51 to her name, Eleanor Whitcomb felt something rise in her chest that she had no business feeling. Hope. "This is my castle," she whispered to the dark, saying it to make it true. "This is my home, and I am going to make it beautiful." In the kitchen, the raccoon chattered, soft, almost like an answer, and Nell, against everything, fell asleep. She woke at dawn to bird song and a cold so deep it had got into the bones of her. Her breath hung white in the air. The night had dropped near freezing, and the blanket had lost the fight hours ago. But there was light now, gray light through the broken glass, and light, even gray light, shows you what you've got. What she had was a catastrophe, but she made herself look at it without flinching. Survival first, that was the order of things. Water. She had legs, and there was a forest, and a forest meant water. She found it inside an hour, a creek 200 yards down a slope, running fast and clear over stone. She'd have to boil it, but it was water. Then she started to clean, because cleaning was a thing she knew how to do, and there is a particular medicine in doing a thing you know how to do when everything else has come apart. She swept with the pine branch, pushed debris to the door and out with her hands, and by noon she'd cleared the main room down to the floorboards, and that was when she saw it, the thing that changed how she looked at the whole place. She'd expected the floor under all that ruin to be soft, rotted, garbage, but it wasn't. She knelt and ran her scratched hand across the boards she'd uncovered, and under a century and a half of neglect, the wood was sound, scarred, stained dark, but solid, hard as iron under her palm. She knew old wood when she felt it. Her father had been a carpenter. This was old-growth timber, the kind that doesn't grow anymore, from trees that were ancient when this country was young, the kind of wood a man chooses on purpose, the kind a man pays for, the kind a man lays down board by board because he means to stay. Nell sat back on her heels in the gray light, her heart doing something odd, because a thought had come to her, and it would not leave. A man does not build a throwaway shack from wood like this. Nobody hauls old-growth timber 12 miles into the deep woods to build something he doesn't care about. This little ruin that 30 men had laughed at, this raccoon condo, this worthless condemned nothing she'd bought for the price of a sandwich. Somebody had built it to last. Somebody had loved it. Somebody a long, long time ago had wanted this exact spot in the woods badly enough to do it right. And Eleanor Whitcomb, kneeling on a floor that was better than her bidding price, had any right to buy, looked around the wreck of her new home with entirely new eyes. She had not bought garbage. She had bought a question. And for the first time since they'd put her on that curb, Nell had something she wanted to do more than she wanted to lie down and quit. She wanted to know whose hands had laid this floor. She wanted to know what kind of person came 12 miles into nowhere to build a thing this carefully. She wanted to know the story she had walked into the middle of. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. The first hard freeze was coming. She had no heat, no real food, no neighbors, and a roof with the whole stuff full of tarp. But she had a creek for water, a man named Hollis who said he'd look in, a patch of clean floor where there'd been a dump, and a question worth answering. It was, she decided, getting slowly to her aching feet, a great deal more than she'd had yesterday morning on that sidewalk. She picked up the pine branch, and she got back to work. The first hard freeze came 4 nights later, and it nearly killed her. The temperature dropped so far that the creek water in her bottle skinned over with ice. Nell lay on the floor under every piece of cloth she owned and shook so hard her teeth knocked together. She thought somewhere in the worst of that night that the laughing men in the basement might be right after all, that they'd find her in the spring, that this was how it ended for women who got thrown away. But morning came. It always does. That's the thing nobody tells you about despair. The morning comes anyway, whether you've earned it or not. And with the morning came a plan, because Nell understood now that hope was not going to be enough. Hope didn't generate heat. She needed to make this ruin hold warmth, and she needed to do it before the next freeze. And she had $51 and 2 hands that had spent 40 years doing dishes, and not much harder. So she went to work, the real work, the kind that rebuilds a body along with a house. The windows first. She couldn't afford glass, but she could stop the wind. She gathered straight branches from the forest and wove them into frames. Then she dug clay from the creek bank and mixed it with mud and dried grass into a thick paste, the way her carpenter father had once shown her a lifetime ago, when she was a girl who watched a man's hands and thought she'd never need to know such things. She packed that paste into the woven branches, sealed each window solid, left a gap at the top of each for light. It took her the better part of 3 weeks, Her hands cracked and bled in the cold. She'd warm them over the lantern and go back out and do it again. The roof was harder. She couldn't replace it, but she could patch it. She cut pine boughs with a dull saw she'd found rusting in a collapsed shed, thousands of them, and layered them like shingles over the worst of the holes, lapping them careful so the pitch sealed the rain out. When it rained, she stood inside and watched the ceiling like a hawk, and where a drop came through, she marked it and patched it the next dry day. And here is what nobody who'd known the old Nell would have believed. Her body began to change. The back that had ached so bad those first nights grew strong. Muscles she hadn't used since she was young woke up and remembered themselves. Her soft hands went hard and capable. She was 70, and she was getting stronger than she'd been at 60. She found work too. That mattered more than the heat in the end. The camp store 5 miles back was run by a woman about Nell's own age, Ruby Tate. Wide and quick and sharp-eyed with gray hair, she kept under a man's wool cap. The first time Nell walked in, scratched and filthy, and counting out coins for rice and beans, Ruby watched her over the counter with an expression Nell couldn't read. "You're the one bought the Timber Ridge place," Ruby said. Not a question. In a place that small word ran ahead of you like a dog. "I am." Ruby rang up the rice, the beans, then without a word she added a half loaf of bread and a wedge of cheese, and she didn't charge for them. "Day old," she said before Nell could protest. "Can't sell it anyhow." Then Ruby looked at her a long second. "You want work?" Nell went still. "I need help mornings, 3 days a week, 5 to 8 cleaning and stocking, 15 an hour, cash." Nell did the arithmetic before her heart could get involved. 135 a week, better than 500 a month. With her Social Security, if she could ever get it forwarded, it was enough, not to be comfortable, but to live, to buy a few nails and a better saw, to not die. "Yes," she said. "When do I start?" "Monday, 5 sharp." Ruby's mouth did something that was almost a smile. "And wear better boots than them. You'll lose a toe." So a routine took hold, a brutal one. 3 mornings a week, Nell woke at 3:30 in the pitch dark and walked 5 miles through the frozen forest by lantern light to scrub Ruby's floors, then walked 5 miles back and worked on the house till the light failed. The other days she worked the house dawn to dark. She foraged, learned which roots were food and which were poison, leached acorns into a bitter flour, found wild onion by the creek, ate simple and ate enough. And slowly the camp store mornings became something other than a job, because Ruby Tate, it turned out, was the first person in years who looked at Nell and saw a whole woman. Not a burden, not a charity case, not a crazy old lady who'd bought a death trap. Just Nell. They'd work in the gray pre-dawn, the two of them, and they'd talk. And the talk got deeper, the way talk does between two people who've both been somewhere cold. "You've got grown kids," Ruby said one morning. It wasn't a guess. "2. Nell kept mopping. "How'd you know?" "You got the look. Woman who gave everything to people who handed it back empty." Ruby stacked cans without slowing. "I got a son in Florida, hasn't called in 6 years, married a woman who decided I wasn't the right sort. The visit stopped, then the card stopped." She shrugged like it didn't cost her. It clearly cost her. "You learn to stop waiting by the phone. Takes about 4 years. Then you're free." And Nell stopped mopping and looked at this woman and understood she'd found in a camp store in the middle of nowhere the first real friend she'd had since Walter died. "They called me a burden," Nell heard herself say. She'd never said it out loud. "My own too. Put me on the curb with my things in boxes." Ruby didn't gasp, didn't pity her. That was the gift of her. She just set down a can and said, "Then they're fools, and fools generally find out, eventually." A pause. "Come have coffee in the back. The floor'll keep." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in a year. Then they're fools. No soft sympathy, just a flat refusal to agree that Nell was what her children had said she was. By Christmas, 3 months in the house was a different place. Weather tight. the wood stove cleaned out and patched with shaped stones, drawing proper, at last throwing real heat into the little room. A bed frame built of branches and stuffed with dried grass and pine, softer than the floor by a mile. She'd mortared the floor holes shut with creek stone, scrubbed the mold and sealed the wood with a wash of ash and clay. She had food laid by, she had warmth, she had survived the thing the whole town had bet she wouldn't. Hollis came by every week or so, bringing things he claimed he didn't need: a kerosene lamp, a wool blanket, a good thick one, a little camp stove. He'd look at the sealed windows, the patched roof, the smoke rising straight from the chimney, and shake his head slow. "You're actually doing it," he said one December afternoon. "You know what they're saying in town? They had a pool going on when they'd find your body. You've cost a few men money." "Good," Nell said. "Tell them to bet against me again. I could use the income." Hollis laughed, the real kind, and Nell realized she'd made him laugh and that she'd wanted to, and that somewhere in 3 months of the hardest labor of her life, she had become a person who made jokes again. The woman on the curb couldn't have. That woman had forgotten she had a voice. But the thing that changed everything came in late December, and it came the way the floor had, from her own refusal to look away from a question. She was working on the ceiling, patching a stubborn leak, and she noticed something she'd walked under 100 times without seeing. One section of ceiling board was different from the rest, cleaner, less water-stained, as if it had been protected somehow, as if it had been put up later, or put up to hide something. And Nell stopped, lantern in one hand, and the carpenter's daughter in her woke all the way up, because she remembered the floor, the old-growth timber, the question she'd carried since the first morning: whose hands? And here was a board that didn't match its neighbors in a house built by somebody who did everything on purpose. She got the hammer, and careful, so careful, she pried the odd board loose. Behind it was a hollow, a gap between ceiling and roof, not unusual in old building that, a space for insulation, except this space had something in it that did not belong: a wooden crate, maybe 2 feet square, wrapped in oilcloth gone to rot, heavy when she worked it free and lowered it down far heavier than empty wood, and burned into the side of it with a branding iron a long time ago, E.T. 1871. Nell's hands had started to shake, and not from the cold. She'd seen those initials before. That was the thing. She'd seen them and not understood. 2 weeks back, scrubbing a beam over the door, she'd found them carved into the wood. E.T. 1871. She'd thought a builder's mark and gone on. But here they were again, burned into a hidden crate. The same hand, the same year. Whoever E.T. was, he'd built this house, and he'd hidden something in its bones. She pried the crate open. Inside, wrapped in more oilcloth and dry and whole and waiting 150 years for somebody to find them. Books, leather journals, the covers cracked but sound, and pressed flat between sheets of heavy paper, hundreds of them, plants, leaves, flowers, every one labeled in a careful slanting hand in Latin with dates and places, and drawings, beautiful exact drawings of leaf and root and wing. Nell lifted the top journal like it might come apart in her hands. On the first page in ink, gone brown with age, Edmund Thorne. Field Notes, New England Flora, begun June 1871. And Nell sat down on the cold floor of her $5 house and could not breathe, because she knew that name. She'd seen it. Where had she? And then it came. Ruby's store, the little glass case by the register, the one with the arrowheads and the faded photographs, the local history nobody looked at twice. There'd been a card in it, a naturalist, a famous one, an Englishman who'd come to the Vermont woods in the 1870s to study plants and had walked into the forest one winter and never walked out. Body never found. His life's work lost. One of those mysteries a region keeps and half forgets. Edmund Thorne. She had not bought a ruin. She had bought the last house of a vanished man, and she had just found what the world had given up for lost a century and a half ago. Now, here is where the old Nell and the new one came to a fork, and Nell felt it happen inside her, a cold, quick thing, because the first feeling that rose in her, before wonder, before anything, was fear, a clutching animal fear. She knew what happened when Eleanor Whitcomb had something of value. People took it, people with patient voices and papers to sign. She'd had a house once free and clear, and her own children had peeled it off her like skin. And here she was holding a thing that, if it was what she thought it was worth more than that house 10 times over. And every instinct 3 years of betrayal had built in her said the same thing. Tell no one, hide it, wrap it back in the oilcloth and put the board back and let it be your secret, because the moment anyone knows, they will find a way to take it, the way they always take. She actually started to do it. She had the board in her hand. She was reaching to put it back, and then she stopped, because there was a voice in her head, and for once it wasn't fear's voice. It was Ruby's. Then they're fools, and fools generally find out. It was Hollis handing her a 20 he said was a housewarming. It was a stranger driving her 12 miles into the dark and refusing her money. The world had thrown her away, yes, but the world had also, in the worst season of her life, sent her 2 people who'd asked for nothing and given what they had. And she understood, sitting there with the board in her hand, that the fear wanted her to do to herself exactly what Daniel had done to her, to make her world small, to wall her off, to let what one set of people had done decide what every person after them would be allowed to be. She would not. She was done letting other people's cruelty write her life. But she wasn't a fool either. She'd been a fool once. She knew the taste. So she made a plan that was neither fear nor blindness. She'd tell the one person who'd handed her kindness and asked nothing, and she'd protect what was hers while she did it. She went to Hollis, because she'd learned something else about Hollis Barnes in 3 months. Before he ran a crossroads store, he'd taught high school science for 30 years. He knew the difference between a leaf and a specimen. He knew people at the university. She showed him the crate on a gray January afternoon and watched a retired science teacher go pale and then flush as he turned the pages. Nell, his voice had dropped, do you know what this is? I think it's Edmund Thorne's lost work, she said. But I wanted somebody who'd actually know before I did anything. And Hollis. She put her hand flat on the crate, not grabbing, just claiming. I need you to hear me first. This house, these books, this is all I have in the world. If it's worth something, I will not lose it. Not again. I had a house once. I want your word that helping me does not mean handing me to people who'll do what my children did. Hollis looked at her, and there was no offense in his face, only understanding, the understanding of a man who'd watched her live in this place and knew exactly what it had cost her to say it. It's your land, he said. Anything found on it is yours by law. I'll bring you somebody who can tell us what it is. Photographs first. The books don't leave your hands. And nobody, Nell, nobody takes one thing from you that you don't choose to give. You have my word. And you've seen what my word's worth. She had. That was the thing that let her say yes. She had seen exactly what his word was worth, all winter long, in kerosene and wool and a laugh in a cold doorway. All right, she said. The somebody was a botanist named Dr. Vivian Halloran, University of Vermont, specialist in historical plant studies. Hollis photographed every page, every specimen, every drawing, and sent them off, and 3 days later the reply came, and Hollis drove out to read it to her by the wood stove because she had no way to read it herself. If this is a hoax, Dr. Halloran had written, it's the finest one I've seen in 30 years, but it isn't a hoax. The hand matches Thorne's known letters. The Latin is correct for the period. Several of these specimens are species declared extinct in Vermont in the 1920s. If they're authentic, they are the only preserved examples on Earth. I need to see them. And the house. If this is truly Thorne's cottage, the structure itself is of historical significance and should be protected. Nell sat with that a long moment. the fire ticking in the stove she'd rebuilt herself. "What does it mean?" she said, in plain words. "It means," Hollis said carefully, "that your $5 house might be worth a great deal more than $5. The journals could be priceless. The specimens are scientifically irreplaceable. And the house, if they can prove it was Thorne's, could be made a protected historical site, which means grant money, restoration, protection from anyone who'd want to tear it down or take it." He met her eyes. "Nell, I think you may have just saved yourself, for good this time." And Nell, who had not cried once, not on the curb, not in the freezing dark, not through any of it, put her rough hands over her face and wept, not for the money. She wants you to know that. She wept because for 3 years she had believed somewhere under everything that her children had been right, that she was a burden, that she'd gone soft and useless and was rightly thrown away, that the smallness they'd made of her was the true size of her. And here was proof in a crate she'd found herself, in a house she'd saved, with broken nails, that she was not small at all, that a discarded woman could uncover what a century of scholars had lost, that the thing everyone called worthless and the woman everyone called worthless had both of them been treasures the whole time, just waiting on a pair of eyes that would actually look. Dr. Halloran came in person 2 weeks later in the deep of January, skeptical professional braced for disappointment. The skepticism lasted about 5 minutes. Nell watched a serious woman of science make small, helpless sounds of wonder over a workbench, turning pages, with gloved fingers holding a magnifying glass over a pressed flower 150 years dead. "This is real," Dr. Halloran finally said. She looked up and her eyes were bright. "Mrs. Whitcomb, do you understand what you've done? Edmund Thorne's work was lost for a century and a half. The man himself was a legend and a tragedy, and you found him, in your ceiling." She shook her head slowly. "How did you even think to look?" And Nell, standing in the warm little room she'd dragged back from the grave, gave the only answer that was true. "The floor was too good," she said. "A man doesn't build a throwaway house out of wood like that. So I figured whoever he was, he meant to stay. And a man who means to stay hides what matters where it'll keep." She almost smiled. "I just kept asking who'd love this place. Turns out he answered me." Dr. Halloran was quiet a moment. Then she said the thing that would shape the rest of it. "It needs to be preserved properly, archived, the house evaluated for historical status. And Mrs. Whitcomb, there's funding for exactly this. You wouldn't lose the house. You'd own it still. You could live here as its keeper, its curator, even if you wanted the title." Nell looked at the crate, at the careful, patient, brilliant hand of a man dead 150 years who'd come 12 miles into nowhere to do his work in peace and hidden it where it would be safe until somebody worthy found it. Somebody worthy. She thought of 30 men laughing in a basement. She thought of 2 children and a closing door. She thought of a curb on a cold morning and the bone certainty that her life was over and had amounted to nothing. And she thought he was waiting for me. 150 years. And the one person desperate enough to buy his house for $5 turned out to be the one stubborn enough to dig him out of the dark. "I'd like that," Nell said, her voice steady, her chin up the way it had been in the basement, the way it would stay now. "I'd like to be his keeper. I believe I'm qualified. I've gotten very good at keeping things alive out here that everybody else gave up on." Outside snow was falling on the clearing, on the patched roof and the woven windows, and the smoke rising straight and strong from a chimney. A discarded woman had rebuilt herself, and word of what she'd found was already starting to move down the mountain, into the town, toward a newspaper, and though Nell didn't know it yet, toward a glossy SUV and 2 people who had decided a year ago that their mother was worth exactly nothing at all. They were about to hear what she was worth, and they were going to come and have a look for themselves. Spring came to the mountains slow that year, grudging, the way mountain spring does. The snow rotted off the clearing in patches brown earth showing through, and the work of turning Nell's ruin into something the state would call a treasure began in earnest. It moved faster than she could have dreamed. Dr. Halloran brought the Vermont Historical Society. They came up the dirt road in their clean cars and walked through Nell's house with careful eyes and quiet voices. They confirmed what the floor had told her on the first morning. The structure matched old letters describing Edmund Thorne's cottage in the northern woods, and then in the main beam under 150 years of grime they found his initials carved deep. E.T. 1871, the same hand as the crate, the same as the journals. It was him. There was no longer any doubt. This was the lost cottage of Edmund Thorne, and the woman who owned it was the woman who'd bought it for $5, while a room full of men laughed. The house was declared a historical site that April, and with the designation came what Hollis had promised: grant money, not a fortune, but enough to make the house sound while keeping it true to what it was, enough to put glass back in the windows, though they kept Nell's woven mud shutters mounted beside them on purpose as a record of the winter a woman had survived in here with her bare hands, enough to shore the foundation, restore the old floor she'd uncovered, replace the wood stove with a safe one that looked the same, run hidden wire and pipes so she'd have light and water at last without spoiling a thing, and a climate-controlled case installed where Nell could show the journals to visitors, but no hand could ever take them. The work crews came in May, and Nell, who had done every repair before them alone on her knees in the cold, now stood in her own dooryard and directed them. Curator of the Thorne cottage, the university paid her a small stipend for it. She kept her 3 mornings at Ruby's too, because she liked them, because Ruby was her friend, and you don't quit on a friend just because your fortunes turn. For the first time since Walter died, Eleanor Whitcomb had enough. Enough money, enough warmth, enough purpose to fill a day and send her to bed tired in the good way. What she did not have was her children. She hadn't spoken to them since the curb, hadn't tried. She'd built a whole life in the gap where they'd been, and the gap had closed over the way the forest closes over an old logging road until you'd hardly know a road had run there at all. And then on a bright morning in November, a year almost to the day since they'd set her boxes on the sidewalk, she heard a car on the dirt road, and she knew the sound of it before she saw it. She'd ridden in that car in another life. The glossy SUV pulled into the cleared lot by the historical marker, and Daniel got out, and Sandra, both in expensive casual clothes that didn't belong on a mountain, both wearing the same arranged expression of warmth that didn't reach the eyes, the expression Nell knew now for exactly what it was. She was in the garden when they came, the vegetable garden she'd put in that spring, flourishing in the clearing. She straightened up, brushed the dirt off her hands, and she did not walk to meet them. She waited. "Mom," Daniel said with that patient voice, the voice she'd know in her grave, "we've been looking everywhere for you." "Have you?" Nell said. "For how long?" "Months," Sandra said. "You disappeared. We were worried sick." And Nell almost laughed. She didn't, but it was close. "You set my things on a curb a year ago," she said. "Even, quiet. You called me a burden. You sold my house out from under me. When exactly did the worrying start?" Daniel had the grace to look uncomfortable. "For a second. Things ended badly. We were stressed. We made some calls that maybe weren't right, but we're family, Mom. We came to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," Nell said. "As you can see, we heard about this place." Sandra was looking past her now at the restored cottage, the marker, the crew's tidy lumber. "It's been in the papers. Local woman finds lost naturalist's journals. Quite a story." "It is," Nell agreed. "I'm very fortunate." A pause. Daniel and Sandra traded a look. Nell saw it, the same look they'd traded across her coffee table a year ago, the look of two people deciding how to bring up the thing they'd actually come for. "It's a beautiful property now," Daniel said. Casual, so casual. Must be worth a good deal. Historical designation, state interest. You could probably sell it for quite a sum. And there it was, the real reason, laid on the table like the brochure had been. I'm not selling, Nell said. But Mom, Sandra stepping in gentle as a knife, you can't live out here alone. You're 71. What if you fall? What if you get sick? It isn't safe. It's perfectly safe. This is too much for one person, and the historical value, shouldn't it be shared? A museum, a university. They'd pay well. Then you could come stay with us, with family, where you belong, where you belong. And Nell looked at her daughter a long moment and asked the only question worth asking, when did I start belonging with family again? Sandra, was it before or after you read in the paper that my $5 house was worth money? Daniel flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? Nell's voice didn't rise. That was the thing. A year ago it might have. Now it didn't have to. Let me tell you what happened after you drove away. I had $56. I bought this place for 5 of them while a room full of men laughed at me. I lived in a ruin. I slept on the floor. I sealed these windows with mud and my own hands. I patched that roof with pine boughs. I walked 5 miles in the dark 3 days a week to scrub a store for $15 an hour. And I found what's in that case. She held up her hands, the scars on them, the permanent calluses. Nobody helped me. No family. A stranger named Hollis helped me. A woman named Ruby gave me work. A scientist named Vivian saw what I'd found and made sure no one could steal it. Strangers, all of them. They became my family while my children were busy spending the money from my house. We didn't know, Sandra said, weakly. You didn't ask, Nell said. You didn't care. I was a burden you wanted gone. And the moment I was gone, I stopped existing for you until there was money in it. The silence after that was a heavy thing. The wind moved in the pines. A crew member somewhere behind the house stopped hammering as if the whole mountain were listening. And then Daniel's patience cracked the way it had a year ago, and the thing underneath showed its face. After everything we did, he said, raising us, and this is how I raised you, Nell said, and now just once there was steel all the way through it. You did not raise me, Daniel. I raised you. I gave you 45 years of everything I had, and the first morning I was inconvenient. You put me on a curb like a broken chair. So no, you don't get to stand in my dooryard and tell me what I owe. The accounting on that went the other way a long time ago, and it's settled now. Settled the day I stopped waiting for you to be sorry. Daniel stared at her, looking, she thought, for the soft woman he'd known how to manage, the one with the patient son and the closing door, and not finding her, because that woman had frozen half to death in a cabin and gotten up anyway and was not coming back. He turned and walked to the SUV. Done. The way he was always done the second a thing stopped being worth his while. But Sandra didn't move. She stood in the dooryard, and something was happening in her face that Nell hadn't seen there in years. The arranged warmth was gone, and under it wasn't calculation the way it had been under Daniel's. Under Sandra's was something raw, something coming apart. Sandra, Daniel at the car, come on. And Sandra said, not turning to him in a voice gone thin, no. The word landed in the clearing like a dropped stone. Sandra, we're leaving. You're leaving, she said. I need a minute. Go. I'll find my own way back. Daniel stared at her, then swore under his breath and got in the SUV and drove off down the dirt road in a churn of mud the way he'd come alone. And Sandra stood there, 42 years old, and she began quietly to fall apart. I'm not here for the house, she said. I want Mom. I need you to know that. I came because Daniel said, come, and God, I always do what he says. I've done it my whole life, but I'm not here for the money. I don't even want... She stopped, pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth. I don't even know how to say it. Then say it plain, Nell said. Not warm, Not yet, but not closing the door either. Plain's all I've got patience for anymore. Sandra looked at her, and the truth came out of her in pieces, the way truth does when it's been held too long. I knew it was wrong, she said. A year ago, in your living room, I knew it while we were doing it, and I went along. Because Daniel had it all worked out, and because, Mom, I'm in debt. Bad debt. Carl lost his job, and we hid it, and Daniel said the house money would fix everything, and I just wanted it fixed so badly that I let him call you a burden to your face. I let him. I sat there, and I said nothing, and I have not had one good night's sleep since. Her voice broke clean in half. I'm not asking you for money. I swear to you I'm not. I don't know what I'm asking. I think I'm asking if it's too late to know you before I turn into him. And Nell stood very still in her garden, because here was the moment, and she felt the old pulls, both of them. The fear that said, this is a trick, she's cleverer than Daniel, she's come at you sideways. And the softness, the mother softness that had run her whole life, that said, she's your child, she's crying, fold her in, forgive it all, make the tea. And Nell did neither, because she'd learned something in that cabin, something the winter had taught her with its cold hands, and it was this: forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and a door that opens is not the same as a debt erased. She could keep her dignity and still keep her heart. The two weren't enemies. She thought they were all winter, hugging her secret to her chest. Ruby had taught her better. You could be no fool and still be no fortress. I don't know if it's too late, Nell said, honest, because honest was what she had now instead of soft. I don't trust you yet, Sandra. You should know that going in. A year of silence doesn't wash out in one good cry, even a true one, and I think this one's true. I do. Sandra nodded, wiping her face, taking it, which told Nell more than the tears had. But I'll tell you what I learned out here, Nell went on. From a man dead 150 years of all people, he came 12 miles into nowhere and built something good and hid it where it'd keep, and he trusted that someday somebody worthy would dig it out of the dark. She looked at her daughter. I'm not going to hand you my trust today. You haven't earned it back, and handing it over unearned is exactly the kind of thing that put me on that curb. But I'll leave it where you can dig for it, if you're willing to do the digging, slow, over time, with your hands, not your mouth. A pause. That's not a yes. That's a maybe you have to work for. It's the most I've got, and frankly, it's more than your brother will ever get. Sandra was crying again, but different now. Not the falling apart kind, the kind that comes when somebody offers you a thing you didn't dare hope for and made you pay a fair price for it in the same breath. That's more than I deserve, she said. It is, Nell agreed. See that you remember that. And then, because she was still a mother, even now, even hardened and wiser, and done being small, she said, there's coffee on. You can come in out of the cold while you wait on whatever ride you can scare up. You can see what your mother built, and then you can start driving up here on Sundays, if you mean it. Ruby comes Sundays. You'll have to earn her too. She's a harder sell than I am. Sandra laughed, wet and surprised, and followed her mother into the warm little house that a discarded woman had dragged back from the grave. Daniel never came back. Nell heard through the long grapevine of a small place that he and Carl had quarreled over money that he'd sold. Something moved somewhere, the details thin and fading. She felt when she heard it neither triumph nor grief, just the clean, flat piece of a thing set down that you'd carried too long. He'd made his choices, she'd made hers, and hers had turned out to be a life. The years after were good ones, the kind nobody would have bet on. In that basement, a $5 bill trembling in an old woman's hand. Researchers came up the mountain to study Thorne's journals. Students. A documentary crew once. Dr. Halloran published a paper on the lost specimens and put Nell's name on it as co-discoverer, and the day she held that printed page, Nell cried because her name was on a piece of science, a thing that would outlast her, and she could never have imagined such a thing. the morning she sat on that curb. Hollis came near every week with tools disguised as gifts because he knew she could never resist a project. Ruby closed the store on Sundays now and drove up for supper, and the two of them would sit on the mended porch in the long gold evenings and not talk the way only real friends cannot talk. Two women the world had tried to throw away who'd found each other at a crossroads store and decided between them that the world was wrong. And Sandra dug, slow, over time, with her hands not her mouth the way her mother had told her to. She came up on Sundays, at first stiff careful paying for the silence she'd kept a year before with 100 small Sundays of showing up. She helped in the garden. She learned to split wood badly, then less badly. She earned Ruby eventually, which was no small thing. She never once mentioned money, and the debt she carried, the real one, the dollars and cents one, she paid off herself slow the hard way, and never asked her mother for a penny of the Thorn grant, and that more than any tears was the thing that finally let Nell open the door the rest of the way. It took 2 years, but the day came when Nell looked at her daughter across the supper table laughing at something Ruby said, dirt under her nails from the garden, and felt the trust she'd left buried finally get dug all the way up into the light. Not given, earned, which is the only kind worth having. On a gold evening in her second autumn as keeper of the Thorn cottage, Eleanor Whitcomb stood in her dooryard and looked at what she'd made of a thing the whole world had called worthless. The cottage glowed behind her warm and sound. Glass in the windows and her mud shutters beside them kept on purpose. A historical marker by the road with a dead man's name on it, and below, in smaller letters, restored and kept by Eleanor Whitcomb. The garden gone to its last harvest. Hollis's truck in the lot, Ruby in the kitchen, Sandra hauling in the wood, and Nell thought about the woman who'd sat on a suitcase on a sidewalk a few short years ago, 70 years old, invisible, certain her life was over and had come to nothing. She wasn't angry at that woman anymore. That was the last thing the mountain had given her, and the hardest. For a long time she'd been furious at the old Nell, for going soft, for signing the papers, for being easy to throw away, but she'd made her peace with that woman now, because that woman, frightened and worn down as she was, had still gotten up off the suitcase, had still read the newspaper, had still raised a trembling $5 bill in a room full of laughter, and said the bravest word she knew, which was mine. Everything Nell had now had grown from that one small, stubborn act of a beaten woman who would not lie all the way down. She forgave her. The woman on the curb, she'd done the best she could with what she had, and it had turned out to be enough. That was the thing nobody had told her, that your worth was never in the hands of the people who threw you away. It was yours the whole time, in what you chose to build after, in the question you were stubborn enough to keep asking when everyone else had quit. A discarded woman and a discarded house had turned out both of them to be treasures all along, waiting on one pair of eyes that would actually look. She'd been that pair of eyes for the house, and in the end, the harder thing by far for herself. The wind came down off the high country, cold and clean and smelling of the coming winter, a winter she'd meet now in a warm house with food laid by and friends at the table and a daughter who'd earned her way back to the door. "Mom," Sandra called from the porch, an armload of split wood against her chest. "Ruby says supper's on. You coming in?" And Eleanor Whitcomb, 72 years old, keeper of a lost man's life, work owner of everything she could see, took one last look at the gold light dying over the trees of her own land. "Coming," she said, and she went into the warm and the noise and the people who'd chosen her, and the lamp in the window burned steady behind her against the dark for everyone she loved and for the memory of a careful man who'd hidden something precious in the woods and trusted that someday somebody worthy would come and dig it out. Somebody worthy had. It had been her all along.